The sterile white of the hospital room felt like a shroud. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, 6-year-old Lily looked like a porcelain doll beginning to crack. Every beep of the heart monitor was a hammer blow to Emma's soul. The injustice wasn't just the illness. It was the clinical indifference of the doctors who called it unexplained and terminal. They had given up. As Emma found the silver wolf pendant in her palm, glowing with a warmth that defied the hospital's chill, she realized the world of logic had failed her. To save her daughter, she had to step into the world of monsters. The scent of pine and damp moss didn't just fill Emma's lungs. It felt as though the forest was trying to reclaim her. Each step through the underbrush was a battle against the autumn chill that seeped through her thin jacket. She didn't care about the cold. She didn't care about the darkness that had swallowed the trail hours ago. All she could see was Lily's face, the way her small hand had felt so light, so fragile, when Emma had kissed her goodbye at the hospital. "Hold on, Lily," Emma whispered, her voice a fragile prayer that vanished into the canopy of ancient trees. "Mommy is coming." The forest of Blackcrest was a place of legend, a territory whispered about in the town below, but never entered. Humans who ventured here often returned with hollow eyes, or didn't return at all. But Emma had no choice. Tucked beneath Lily's pillow, she had found a note in elegant, archaic script. Only the blood of an alpha can save her now. It shouldn't have made sense, but in the depths of her grief, it felt like the only truth left in the world. She clutched the silver pendant, the heirloom her grandmother, Eleanor, had pressed into her hand on her deathbed. The silver wolf with emerald eyes was pulsing. It wasn't just warm, it was thrumming like a second heart. It was guiding her. A twig snapped. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence. Emma froze. The air around her shifted, growing heavy and thick with a scent that was both terrifying and intoxicating. Wild earth, rain-soaked fur, and something ancient. "You are trespassing, human." The voice didn't come from the shadows. It was the shadows. It was deep, a low-frequency vibration that made the very marrow of her bones ache. Emma turned slowly. Standing at the edge of the moonlight was a man who seemed carved from the mountain itself. He was tall, his shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the forest. He wore dark, simple clothes, but the way he stood, still as a predator, betrayed his nature. His eyes weren't human. They were amber, glowing with an otherworldly fire that pierced through the gloom. "Alpha," Emma gasped, her voice cracking. She didn't know how she knew the title, but the word felt right on her tongue. The man stepped forward into a pool of moonlight. His face was beautiful in a savage, unforgiving way. His nostrils flared as he scented the air, reading her fear, her exhaustion, and the underlying scent of the hospital, the scent of death. "Humans who enter our territory uninvited do not leave," he said, his words clipped and cold. "Why have you come to die, Emma Pierce?" Emma flinched. "How do you know my name?" His gaze dropped to the silver pendant in her hand. For a fraction of a second, the coldness in his eyes flickered, replaced by something that looked like ancient, jagged pain. "I know the scent of that silver, and I know the bloodline it belongs to." Emma took a step toward him, her desperation overriding the instinct to flee. "My daughter is dying. The doctors, they don't understand. But my grandmother told me stories. She said there was healing in these woods. Please." The note said only the blood of an alpha could save her. A bitter, humorless smile curved the man's lips. "And you believe that? You believe a monster's blood can bring life? Blood magic has a price, Emma. It isn't a gift. It is a debt. I'll pay it," she said, her voice suddenly iron strong. "Save my daughter, Alpha, and I'll pay any price. My life, my soul. Take whatever you want. Just don't let her fade away." The Alpha, Evander Blackcrest, moved with a speed that defied human physics. One moment he was 10 feet away. The next, he was inches from her, his heat radiating like a furnace. He reached out, his large, calloused hand hovering near her throat, not to strike, but as if he were measuring her pulse. "Dangerous words," he growled, his amber eyes searching hers. "You speak of prices you cannot comprehend. You think you are offering your service, but you are offering your existence." "If she dies, I have no existence," Emma countered, lifting her chin. "Do it. Kill me if you must, but save her first." Evander went utterly still. He looked at the pendant again, and then back at Emma. In the silence of the forest, the distance between them seemed to vanish. There was a connection here, something forged in a past Emma didn't remember, but that Evander clearly could not forget. "The sickness in her," Evander said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "It isn't a virus. It is a shadow, a curse meant for the line of Pierce. To heal it, I must bind her to the pack. I must bind her to me." "Then bind her," Emma whispered. Evander's hand finally touched her skin, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. It was a gesture of terrifying intimacy. "If I do this, Emma, you belong to Blackcrest. You will live within these walls. You will serve this pack. And you will never leave. Is a year of your life worth the soul of your child?" "1,000 years would be," she replied. Evander's eyes flared with a sudden golden intensity. He reached down and scooped her into his arms, as if she weighed nothing. Emma gasped, her hands instinctively clutching his shoulders. He felt like solid stone wrapped in velvet. "Then the bargain is struck," he said, his voice echoing through the trees. "But know this, Emma Pierce. I am not the savior your grandmother described. I am the reason she fled these woods in terror. You have walked into the wolf's den, and the door is now locked." As he turned to run toward the mountain, the trees blurring into a dark smear of green and gray, Emma felt a strange, chilling sensation. The pendant against her chest wasn't just warm anymore. It was burning. A warning from the past that she was too desperate to heed. The speed at which Evander moved was not merely fast, it was predatory and fluid, a blur of moonlight and shadow that made Emma's vision swim. When they finally stopped, she wasn't in a cave or a clearing, but standing before a structure that defied her expectations. Blackcrest Mansion was a monolith of dark stone and silvered timber, appearing to grow directly out of the mountain's jagged hip. It looked ancient, yet the windows glowed with a sharp, modern amber light. Evander didn't wait for her to find her footing. He ushered her through heavy iron-bound doors into a great hall that smelled of cedar, old books, and a faint metallic tang that Emma couldn't yet identify as the scent of 100 wolves. "Wait here," he commanded, his voice vibrating in the high rafters. He vanished into the depths of the house. Moments later, the front doors burst open again. 2 men Emma hadn't seen before entered, carrying a small, limp form wrapped in hospital blankets. "Lily!" Emma's heart lunged into her throat. She rushed toward them, but a woman stepped out from the shadows of a corridor, intercepting her with a hand as cold as a winter stream. The woman was tall, with hair the color of midnight and eyes a piercing, hostile blue. "Stay back, human," the woman hissed. This was Serena, the beta of the pack. Her presence felt like a drawn blade. "You've already brought enough taint into this house." "She is my daughter," Emma cried, struggling against Serena's surprisingly strong grip. "She is the Alpha's responsibility now," a gentler voice intervened. An older man, Gabriel, approached. He had silver hair and kind, weary gray eyes. He was the pack's healer. He gestured for the men to lay Lily on a stone dais in the center of the hall. A raised platform etched with runes that seemed to pulse in the presence of the silver pendant Emma wore. Evander returned, now stripped to a simple black tunic. He carried an ornate silver bowl and a dagger that looked as though it had been forged from a fallen star. He looked at Lily, then at Emma. For a moment, the savage alpha was gone, replaced by a man looking at a dying child with a look of profound, haunted recognition. "The ritual of the blood debt," Gabriel whispered, his voice heavy with gravity. "It is the only way." Evander approached the dais. He didn't look at the others. His focus was entirely on the small girl whose breathing was so shallow it barely stirred the air. He took the silver dagger and, with a practiced flick, sliced his palm. Thick, dark blood, darker than any human's, shimmering with an iridescent sheen, dripped into the bowl. "Emma," Evander called. "Come." Serena released her, though she looked as if she'd rather be tearing Emma's throat out. Emma stepped toward the dais, her legs trembling. "Give me your hand," Evander said. When Emma reached out, his large hand closed over hers. His skin was burning hot, a stark contrast to the chill of the hall. He didn't use the dagger on her. Instead, he pressed his bleeding palm against hers, their blood mingling in a warm, slick union. "By the blood given and the blood received," Evander intoned, his voice dropping into a register that made the floorboards hum. "I take the shadow from this child and bring her into the light of the pack. Her breath is my breath. Her life is my life." He reached out and traced a symbol on Lily's forehead with their joined blood. Then he took the silver wolf pendant from Emma's neck and placed it over Lily's heart. The reaction was immediate. A low thrum filled the room, like the sound of 1,000 bees. A dark, violet mist began to seep from Lily's pores, coiling like smoke before being sucked into the silver pendant. Lily's back arched, a sharp gasp escaping her lips, the first deep breath she'd taken in days. Emma watched in awe as the waxy pallor of death vanished, replaced by a soft, healthy flush. Lily's eyes flickered open, clear, bright blue, and she looked up at the vaulted ceiling. "Mommy," she whispered. Emma collapsed by the dais, sobbing with a relief so intense it felt like a physical weight being lifted. She gathered her daughter into her arms, smelling the scent of lavender and health. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." But as Emma held her child, she looked up and saw the expression on the faces of the wolves. Gabriel looked relieved, but Serena looked triumphant in a way that chilled Emma to the bone. And Evander, he looked devastated. "It is done," Evander said, his voice sounding as though it had been dragged over gravel. He stood up, wrapping a cloth around his hand. "The sickness is gone." "Thank you," Emma breathed, clutching Lily. "Thank you. I'll do anything. I'll start my service now. I'll clean. I'll cook. You don't understand, do you?" Serena stepped forward, her blue eyes gleaming with malice. "You thought you were just hiring yourself out as a servant for a year. You thought this was a simple transaction." Emma looked from Serena to Evander, her heart beginning to hammer again. "What do you mean?" "The blood ritual," Gabriel said softly, pity in his eyes. "It doesn't just heal, Emma. It binds. By mixing your blood with the alphas to save a child of your lineage, you haven't just saved her. You've claimed your inheritance." Emma's hand flew to the pendant. "What inheritance?" Evander turned his back to her, his shoulders tense. "Your grandmother didn't just leave you a necklace, Emma. She left you a gift. The gift of the soul healer. The only power that can cleanse the corruption currently rotting this pack from the inside out." And by participating in the ritual, Serena added, her voice a low purr of victory, "You have officially activated it. You aren't just a guest or a servant anymore, Emma. You are the pack's tether. You cannot leave Blackcrest now. Not because of a contract. but because if you step beyond these mountains, your soul will literally wither away. You are bound to this land, and to him." Emma looked down at her hand, the one that had touched Evander's blood. A faint, glowing mark, shaped like a crescent moon, was beginning to fade into her skin. She realized then the magnitude of her mistake. In her desperation to save Lily's life, she hadn't just promised her labor. She had unknowingly signed away her very essence. She was no longer a visitor in the world of monsters. She was their most valuable prisoner. Emma looked at Evander, hoping for a denial, but he wouldn't look at her. He only stared out into the dark forest, his silhouette a portrait of ancient, silent guilt. "You knew," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "You knew this would happen." Evander finally turned, and for the first time, Emma saw the true depth of the darkness in his past. His eyes weren't just amber. They were filled with the shadows of 1,000 years of choices, just like this one. "I told you," he said, his voice a ghost of a growl. "I am not the savior you were looking for." The morning sun did not bring warmth to Black Crest. It only illuminated the cold, gray reality of the mountainside. Emma stood by the expansive window of her new quarters, watching a thick mist roll over the pine trees like a tidal wave. In the small bed behind her, Lily was still sleeping. A deep, natural sleep that Emma hadn't seen in weeks. The girl's cheeks were rosy, and her breathing was a rhythmic, beautiful sound. But Emma's hand wouldn't stop shaking. She looked down at the faint, silver-white crescent moon mark on her palm. It didn't hurt, but it thrummed with a low-frequency energy. A tether that made her feel as though she were being pulled toward the center of the mansion. Toward him. A soft knock at the door made her jump. A young woman entered, carrying a tray of food and a stack of clean clothes. She was petite, with curly red hair and eyes that were a gentle hazel brown. She didn't have the sharp, predatory edge of Serena or the overwhelming gravity of Evander. "I'm Mira," she said softly, setting the tray down. I'm like you, mostly human. My father was Pack, but I didn't inherit the shift. I'm here to help you." Emma felt a surge of gratitude. "Mira, thank you. Is my daughter, is she really safe here?" Mira's expression was complicated. "She is safer here than anywhere else in the world, Emma. No one touches the Alpha's bloodkin. But the mansion itself, it's a place of long memories. Some of them aren't kind." "I need to speak to Gabriel," Emma said, her voice regaining its strength. "And I need to see Evander. He promised me honesty." "Gabriel is in the infirmary. Follow the scent of eucalyptus and sage," Mira advised. "As for the Alpha, he is in the woods. He always goes to the woods when the sun rises. He says the stone walls of the house feel like a cage." The infirmary was a study in contrasts. Ancient, leather-bound grimoires sat next to state-of-the-art heart monitors. Gabriel was hunched over a microscope, his face lined with the exhaustion that went deeper than skin. "You've come to understand the burden," Gabriel said without looking up. "I've come for the truth," Emma replied, standing at the threshold. "Serena said I'm a soul healer. What does that mean? Why did my grandmother never tell me?" Gabriel sighed and stepped away from the desk. He picked up a small, weathered journal. The handwriting was unmistakably Eleanor's. "Your grandmother, Eleanor Pierce, was the most powerful healer this pack had ever known. She didn't just mend bones, Emma. She could reach into the spirit of a wolf, the feral, chaotic side, and bring it into balance. Without a soul healer, the wolf eventually consumes the man. The aggression grows, the bonds of the pack fray, and eventually, they turn on each other." "The corruption," Emma whispered. "Yes, it's a rot of the spirit. And right now, it's spreading through Black Crest like a plague. Evander has been trying to hold the pack together with sheer willpower, but he's losing." Gabriel looked at her with profound sadness. Eleanor left because she loved him, Emma, and because she feared what he was becoming. Emma felt the room tilt. She loved Evander? 50 years ago, Evander was a different man. He was young, reckless. He lost his first mate to a rival pack's ambush. The grief turned him into a monster. He couldn't shift back. He stayed a wolf for 3 years, hunting, killing, losing every shred of his humanity. Your grandmother was brought here to save him. She spent a year in these woods, sitting with the beast, talking to him, using that pendant to draw out the darkness. Gabriel gestured to the silver wolf Emma was holding. He gave her that pendant as a symbol of his soul. When she finally brought him back to human form, they were bonded. But she saw the darkness that remained in him, a hunger for power, a coldness that terrified her. She knew that if she stayed, her gift would be used to fuel his wars. So she fled. She chose a quiet, human life to protect the bloodline, to protect you. And the sickness? Emma's voice was a ragged edge. Lily's illness. Was it really a curse? Gabriel didn't answer immediately. He looked toward the door where a shadow had fallen across the stone floor. It was bait, a deep voice rumbled. Evander stood in the doorway. His dark hair was damp with dew, and he looked older than he had the night before. His amber eyes were fixed on Emma, filled with a brutal, unflinching honesty. "I didn't cause it," Evander said, stepping into the room. "But I knew it would happen. The enemies of Blackcrest knew that the only way to destroy me was to destroy the pack from within. They used a shadow curse, knowing that the only person who could stop it was a descendant of Eleanor. They waited for you to have a child. They waited for the moment you were most vulnerable." "You let my daughter suffer," Emma said, her voice trembling with a cold, white-hot fury. "You waited for me to come begging so you could trap me here." "I didn't have to wait," Evander countered, his voice low and dangerous. "I could have taken you years ago. But I hoped the gift had died with Eleanor. I wanted you to have the life she chose for you." He moved closer, the heat of his body radiating against her. "But when the corruption began to take my people, when I saw the first of my wolves tear out their own throats in madness, I knew I had no choice. If Blackcrest falls, the shadow curse doesn't stop here. It spreads to your world. It would have found Lily anyway, Emma. At least here, I could save her." Emma looked at him, searching for the monster her grandmother had feared. She saw the ruthlessness, yes. She saw the man who would sacrifice anything for his pack. But beneath that, she saw a profound, crushing loneliness. He was a man who had been a beast for too long, and he was terrified of returning to the dark. "So now what?" Emma asked, clutching the pendant. "I'm your weapon? I go around healing people until I'm exhausted?" "It is more dangerous than that," Evander said. He reached out, his hand hovering near the pendant, but he didn't touch it. "To heal the corruption, you must take a portion of it into yourself. You are the filter, Emma. If you aren't strong enough, the darkness will claim you just as it claims the wolves." Suddenly, a piercing howl echoed from the courtyard below, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. Evander's expression shifted instantly. The alpha returned, cold and commanding. "It's starting again. A patrol has returned." He turned to Emma, his eyes blazing. "You wanted to know the price? Come. See what you've traded your life for." He didn't wait. He strode out of the infirmary, and Emma, driven by a mixture of fear and the irresistible pull of the mark on her palm, followed him into the gray morning light. The courtyard was a theater of chaos. The mist, which had seemed so ethereal from the window, now felt like a damp, suffocating weight. In the center of the flagstones, 4 large wolves were struggling to restrain a 5th. This wolf was smaller, his fur a patchy, sand-colored gray, but he moved with a frantic, bone-snapping strength. He wasn't fighting his packmates. He was fighting something invisible. He snapped at the air, his jaws clicking like a trap, and a low, wet gurgle rose from his throat. "Kyle, stand down," one of the wolves barked, shifting mid-lunge into a tall, muscular man with a scar running across his chest. He pinned the sand-colored wolf's shoulders to the stones. "Alpha, he's losing it." He didn't even recognize the perimeter markers. Evander stepped into the circle, his presence instantly stilling the frantic movement of the other wolves, but the afflicted one, Kyle, only thrashed harder. Emma stood at the edge of the circle, her breath hitching. Up close, the corruption was no longer a mystical concept, it was a horror. Black veins, like ink injected into a marble statue, were pulsing beneath the wolf's skin, traveling upward toward his eyes. The eyes themselves were a milky, sightless purple. A foul metallic smell, like old copper and stagnant water, wafted from him. "Is this what you wanted me to see?" Emma's voice was a whisper, but Evander heard her. "I wanted you to see the reality," Evander said, his voice hard. "The shadow curse doesn't just kill. It hollows them out. It leaves the wolf, but kills the soul. If Kale isn't cleansed, he will become a Draugr, a mindless killer that will eventually turn on his own pups." Serena appeared at Evander's side, her blue eyes flashing with a mixture of fear and naked contempt as she looked at Emma. "The human stands there trembling while our warriors rot. If she is the great healer, why isn't she doing anything?" "She is learning, Serena," Evander snapped, though his eyes never left Emma. "Emma, step forward." Emma's legs felt like lead. Every instinct she possessed, every maternal cell in her body, told her to run back to Lily, to lock the door and hide. But the mark on her palm was burning now, a rhythmic heat that matched the pulse of the black veins on the wolf. She stepped into the circle. The men restraining Kyle looked at her with a desperate, pathetic hope that broke her heart. They were warriors, monsters of legend, and they were looking at a suburban schoolteacher as if she were an angel of mercy. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "The pendant," Gabriel said, appearing behind her like a ghost. "Focus on the silver. It is the conduit. Think of the love you have for your daughter, that pure, untainted light. Use it to reach into the darkness." Emma reached for the silver wolf hanging at her throat. As her fingers closed around it, the emerald eyes of the pendant flared. She knelt beside the thrashing wolf. "Easy, Kyle," she murmured. The wolf's head snapped toward her. For a second, the milky purple eyes seemed to focus. He let out a whimper that sounded devastatingly human. Emma placed her marked palm directly onto the wolf's forehead. The world vanished. Suddenly, Emma wasn't in the courtyard anymore. She was in a cold, howling void. It felt like being submerged in ice water. Shapes shifted in the gloom, wicked, spindly things that whispered in a language made of static and bone grinding. She saw Kale's spirit, a small, flickering light being smothered by a massive, oily shadow. The shadow noticed her. It didn't have a face, but it had a presence, a cold, calculating malice that made her want to scream. Another pierce, it seemed to hiss, another light to snuff out. Emma felt the darkness rush toward her, trying to find a crack in her resolve. It showed her Lily, not the healthy girl in the bed, but the gray, dying child in the hospital. It whispered that this was all for nothing, that she was just a sacrifice to a pack of animals. No, Emma thought, her jaw tightening. I didn't come this far to lose. She thought of Lily's laughter. She thought of the way her grandmother had smiled when she'd handed her the pendant. She pushed that warmth through her arm, through the silver-white mark on her palm, and into the wolf. The silver wolf pendant at her neck erupted in a brilliant, blinding white light. In the physical world, the observers gasped. A shock wave of energy rippled out from Emma, clearing the mist for 30 feet in every direction. The black veins on Kyle's skin didn't just fade. They seemed to evaporate into a foul-smelling steam. The wolf went limp. His eyes cleared, the amber returning, bright and confused. He let out a long, shuddering breath and shifted. A young man, barely 20, lay on the stones, gasping for air. "Alpha?" Kyle wheezed, his voice weak. I was in the dark. I couldn't find the way back." "You're home, Carl," Evander said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. He signaled the others to take the boy to the infirmary. Emma stayed on her knees. She felt hollowed out. The light had left her, but it had left something behind, a bitter, oily residue in the back of her throat. She looked at her hand. The crescent moon mark was no longer silver-white. It was tinged with a faint, bruised purple. "To heal darkness, you must touch it," her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "Each time you banish corruption, a trace remains within you." She tried to stand, but her knees buckled. Evander caught her before she hit the stones. His arms were like iron, but he held her with a strange, hesitant gentleness. "You did it," he whispered, his eyes searching hers. There was a flicker of something new in his gaze. Not just respect, but a terrifying kind of awe. "It didn't go away, Evander," Emma said, clutching his tunic. "The shadow, it didn't just vanish. It saw me." The courtyard went silent. The other wolves, who had been starting to cheer, went still. Serena's face paled. "What do you mean it saw you?" Serena demanded, her voice high and sharp. "It has a mind," Emma said, looking at the purple stain on her palm. "The corruption. It isn't just a spell. It's a sentinel. And now it knows I'm here." Evander's grip on her tightened. He looked up at the jagged peaks of the mountains, where the shadows seemed to be thickening despite the morning sun. "Then the escalation has begun," Evander said to the pack, his voice a thunderous growl. "Double the patrols. Secure the nursery. If the shadow knows the healer has returned, it will stop at nothing to snuff out the flame." He looked back down at Emma, and for a fleeting second, his mask of the Alpha slipped. He looked like the man Gabriel had described, the one who had lost everything once before. "I won't let it take you, Emma," he whispered, so low only she could hear. "Even if I have to burn this entire mountain to the ground to keep the dark away." But as Emma looked at the bruised color on her skin, she realized the danger wasn't just outside the walls. The darkness was already inside her, a small, cold seed waiting for the right moment to bloom. The following days were a blur of gilded exhaustion. Lily was thriving, her laughter echoing through the stone corridors of Blackcrest, with a vibrance that seemed almost supernatural. She could run faster, see further in the twilight, and she had developed an uncanny, quiet bond with the younger wolves. To Emma, it was a miracle she was grateful for every second, but it was a miracle with teeth. Every time Lily reached for her, Emma saw the bruised purple tint on her own palm, a silent reminder of the darkness she had swallowed to keep her daughter whole. Emma sat in the library, a room that felt more like a cathedral dedicated to ancient secrets than a place of study. The air was thick with the scent of old parchment, beeswax, and the faint, lingering ozone of magic. She was searching for something, anything, that Gabriel or Evander hadn't told her. "The purple won't go away with soap and water, Emma." She jumped, nearly knocking over a stack of heavy volumes. Evander was standing in the shadows of a corner, his presence so integrated with the room that he seemed to have manifested from the books themselves. He wasn't wearing his Alpha mask today. His hair was slightly disheveled, and his dark shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the edge of a scar that looked like a jagged lightning bolt over his heart. "Gabriel says it's just residual energy," Emma said, tucking her hand into her lap. but it feels cold, like a piece of winter has lodged under my skin. Evander walked toward her, his footsteps silent on the rug. He didn't stop until he was standing directly over her chair. It's more than energy. It's the weight of the souls you touch. Your grandmother once told me that a healer is like a piece of silk used to clean a muddy blade. Eventually, the silk becomes as stained as the steel. She told you that? Emma looked up, her blue eyes searching his amber ones. You talk about her like you still hear her voice. Evander sat on the edge of the massive oak desk, looking down at his own hands. Large, powerful hands that had built an empire of wolves but couldn't hold on to a single human woman. I hear her in every rustle of the trees. I see her every time I look at you. It is a beautiful torture. Tell me the rest, Evander, Emma said, her voice dropping. No more half-truths. Why did she really leave? Gabriel said she feared what you were becoming. But there's more, isn't there? This corruption? It didn't just appear out of nowhere. Evander's jaw tightened. For a moment, the room seemed to grow darker, the shadow stretching toward him. He reached into a hidden drawer in the desk and pulled out a small, rectangular object wrapped in tattered velvet. He unwrapped it to reveal a shard of black glass, no bigger than a thumb, that pulsed with a sickening, rhythmic light. 50 years ago, Evander began, his voice a ghost of a growl. When I was lost to the wolf, I did things that can never be undone. I didn't just hunt animals, Emma. I hunted the men who had killed my mate. I followed them into the deep places of the earth, places where the sun never reaches. I found an altar dedicated to something far older than werewolves. In my rage, I broke it. This shard is a piece of that altar. Emma leaned back, her heart racing. You brought it back here? I thought I could harness it, he said, his expression filled with a jagged, ancient regret. I thought I could use that darkness to protect my pack, so that no one would ever be taken from us again. But the darkness cannot be tamed. It infected the ground. It infected me. Your grandmother didn't just heal my mind. She realized I had bound the fate of Blackcrest to this shard. She left because she realized the only way to stop the corruption was to destroy the shard, and she knew I wasn't strong enough to let it go. To destroy the shard is to destroy the power that makes me alpha. I chose my throne over her. Emma stared at the black glass. The silver wolf pendant at her throat began to vibrate, its emerald eyes glowing a fierce, warning green. She realized then the true depth of her grandmother's sacrifice and the true danger of the man sitting before her. So the corruption isn't an outside enemy, Emma whispered, the horror dawning on her. It's you. It's your past coming back to claim the debt. It's the shadow I invited in, Evander corrected, his voice heavy with self-loathing. And now, it has found a new way to feed. It's using the Pierce bloodline, you and Lily, as a bridge. It made Lily sick to bring you here. It wants the soul healer to cleanse the vessel so it can inhabit it fully. It wants me to be its king, and you to be its battery. The air in the library suddenly turned frigid. The candles flickered and died, leaving only the moonlight and the sickly pulse of the black shard. Evander! Emma gasped, clutching her throat. The purple stain on her hand began to glow with the same light as the shard. Pain, sharp and biting, lanced through her arm. She could hear the whispers again, the static voice from the courtyard. But this time, it was louder. It wasn't whispering to Coyle. It was whispering to her. The king is weak. The healer is full. Open the gate, Emma Pierce. Give me the shard, Emma commanded, her voice sounding strangely layered, as if another woman were speaking through her. No, Evander roared, standing up. It will consume you. I am already stained. Emma stood, her eyes glowing with a silver light that pushed back the shadows. The bond is already made. If I don't take it now, it will take Lily next. Is that what you want? To save your throne while your daughter's soul is hollowed out? Evander froze. The mention of Lily was the only weapon that could pierce his armor. His hand, clutching the velvet-wrapped shard, trembled. He looked at Emma, truly looked at her, and saw not just Eleanor's granddaughter, but a mother whose ferocity rivaled his own. It will hurt, he whispered. I've already paid the price, she replied. She reached out and closed her purple-stained hand over the black shard. The explosion of sensation wasn't sound. It was pure, unadulterated agony. Emma felt as though her veins were being filled with liquid lead. She saw the history of Blackcrest, the blood, the wars, the moment Evander had broken the altar in his grief. She felt the shadow's hunger, its ancient, cold loneliness. But she also felt something else. She felt the pendant at her throat surge with a heat that was almost solar. It wasn't just a conduit anymore. It was a cage, pulling the darkness from the shard and into the silver. Emma let out a scream that shook the windows. The library doors flew open, and Serena and Gabriel rushed in, followed by a wide-eyed Lily. "Mommy!" Lily cried. The silver light and the black shadow clashed in the center of the room, a swirling vortex of power that lifted Emma off her feet. Evander grabbed her waist, trying to anchor her, his own wolf eyes blazing gold as he fought to share the burden. With a final, bone-chilling crack, the shard in Emma's hand shattered into fine gray dust. The darkness vanished. The candles flared back to life. Emma collapsed into Evander's arms, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The shard was gone, but the library was silent, a heavy, expectant silence. "Is it over?" Gabriel asked, his voice trembling. Emma looked down at her hand. The purple stain hadn't vanished. Instead, it had spread, covering her entire palm and winding around her wrist like a permanent, bruised bracelet. She looked up at Evander, and then at Serena. The beta woman was looking at Emma with an expression that wasn't just hate, it was terror. Because Emma wasn't just a healer anymore. Her eyes, usually a soft blue, now held a faint, shimmering ring of purple. "It's not over," Emma whispered, her voice sounding like the wind through the pines. "I didn't destroy the shadow. I gave it a home." She looked at Lily, who was staring at her mother, with a mixture of love and a new, unsettling recognition. The bond between them had changed. It was no longer just mother and daughter. They were now 2 points of a triangle, with the alpha as the third. The mistake was clear now. By shattering the shard, Emma hadn't ended the curse. She had internalized it, making herself the very thing the shadow needed to survive. The dust of the shattered shard settled like gray snow, but the air in the library remained heavy, charged with a static that made the hair on Emma's arms stand up. She remained in Evander's arms, her body feeling unnaturally light, yet impossibly cold. When she looked down at her wrist, the purple mark didn't just look like a bruise anymore. It looked like a living ink, moving sluggishly beneath her skin. "Get the child out of here." Serena's voice cut through the silence, sharp and jagged. She was standing by the door, her blue eyes fixed on Emma, with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. "Now." "Mommy?" Lily's voice was small, trembling. She took a step toward the desk, but Mira intercepted her, wrapping a protective arm around the girl's shoulders. "I'm okay, Lily," Emma said, but her voice sounded distant, as if she were speaking from the bottom of a well. "Go with Mira. I'll be there in a minute." As the door clicked shut behind them, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Gabriel approached cautiously, his medical kit forgotten on the floor. He peered at Emma's eyes. The faint purple ring around her irises was unmistakable. "You shouldn't have touched it," Gabriel whispered, his voice thick with dread. The shard wasn't just a source of power, Emma. It was a seal, a physical anchor for the first wolf's rage. Evander didn't let her go. He held her as if she might dissipate into smoke if he loosened his grip. "She did what I couldn't," he growled at Gabriel. "She ended the rot." "No, Evander," Gabriel countered, his face pale in the moonlight. "She didn't end it. She absorbed it. Look at her." Evander pulled back slightly, his amber eyes searching Emma's. The guilt that had been a flicker in him before was now a conflagration. He reached out to touch the purple mark on her wrist, but as his fingers brushed her skin, he flinched. "You're freezing," he breathed. "I feel everything," Emma said. She looked at Serena, and for a moment, the world blurred. She didn't just see the hostile beta woman. She saw Serena's soul, a tapestry of fierce loyalty, hidden insecurity, and a deep, gnawing fear of being replaced. Emma could feel Serena's pulse, her anxiety, the way her muscles were coiled to spring. She looked at Gabriel and saw his weariness, the decades of watching his friends die, the clinical detachment he used as a shield. Then she looked at Evander. The truth hit her with the force of a physical blow. Beneath the alpha's strength, beneath the guilt, there was a tether, a black, shimmering cord that connected him directly to the mark on her wrist. "The Pierce women weren't just healers, were they?" Emma asked, her voice steady despite the coldness in her chest. Gabriel sighed and sank into a chair, looking every bit of his 80 years. "The history of the Northern Pacts is written in blood, Emma. Centuries ago, the first Alpha made a pact to gain the strength to protect his people. He traded a portion of the Pact's collective soul for invincibility. It worked, but it left a void, a hunger that eventually became the corruption. And my family? The Pierce line were the keepers of the balance," Gabriel explained. "Your ancestors were the only ones who could bridge the gap between the human and the beast. When the first Alpha realized the hunger was becoming a curse, he bound his bloodline to yours. The Pierce women became the living locks to the gate of that hunger. As long as a Pierce was at the side of the Alpha, the shadow stayed contained." Emma looked at Evander, her eyes wide. "That's why you needed my grandmother, not just because you were feral, but because without her, the Pack's soul was literally leaking away." "She didn't leave because she was afraid of me," Evander said, his voice a low, painful rumble. "She left because she realized that as long as she stayed, I would never have to face the darkness I had inherited. She wanted to break the cycle. She thought that if she took the lock away, the gate would eventually wither and die. But it didn't," Emma said. "It just got hungrier." "It waited," Gabriel added. "It waited for the bloodline to return. It made Lily sick because it knew you would do exactly what you just did. It wanted you to break the physical shard so that the shadow could move from a dead object into a living vessel. A vessel that can move, that can feel, that can be controlled." Serena stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists. "She is a ticking time bomb, Evander. The shadow is inside her now. If she loses control, if her emotions overwhelm her, that hunger will consume every wolf on this mountain. We are essentially living inside the cage with the predator." "She is not a predator," Evander roared, his voice shaking the library shelves. The gold in his eyes flared, and for a second, his shadow on the wall seemed to grow claws. "She is the only reason your warriors are still standing." "Evander, stop," Emma said, reaching out and touching his chest. The effect was instantaneous. The gold in his eyes receded. The tension in the room snapped like a violin string. Evander looked down at her hand, his breath hitching. Where she touched him, he felt a momentary, blissful silence, a peace he hadn't known in 50 years. But Emma felt the opposite. She felt his ancient rage, his possessiveness, his terrifying love for her grandmother that had now transferred, warped and intense, onto her. She pulled her hand away as if burned. "Serena is right," Emma whispered. "I can feel it. It's not just a mark. It's a mouth. It's hungry, Evander. It wants to feed on the pack's energy. It wants to turn me into the very thing I'm supposed to heal." "We will find a way to stabilize it," Gabriel said, though he didn't sound convinced. "There are rituals, ancient texts." "There is no ritual for this, Gabriel," Serena spat. "There hasn't been a vessel in 300 years. The last time this happened, the healer turned into a wraith and decimated half the continent before she was put down." The word wraith hung in the air like a death sentence. Emma looked at the window. The moon was high and full, a silver coin in a sea of ink. She thought of Lily, sleeping safely down the hall, blissfully unaware that her mother had just become the most dangerous creature in the forest. The truth was revealed, and it was a bitter pill. She wasn't the savior of Blackcrest. She was its ultimate gamble. She was the lock that had become the door, and the door was starting to creak open. "I need to be alone," Emma said, backing away from them. "Emma, wait!" Evander reached for her, but she sidestepped him. "Don't," she warned. "When you touch me, I feel the hunger grow. It likes you, Evander. It likes your power. If you stay near me, I don't know if I can keep it from taking what it wants." She turned and fled the library, her footsteps silent on the stone floors. As she ran toward her quarters, she realized that her senses were no longer human. She could hear the heartbeats of every wolf in the mansion, a rhythmic, thumping orchestra of life. She could smell the fear in the hallways, the resentment in the kitchens, the weary hope in the infirmary. She reached her room and leaned against the door, gasping for air. The purple mark on her wrist was glowing now, a steady, rhythmic pulse that matched the beating of her own heart. She walked to the mirror and looked at herself. She looked the same, yet entirely different. The woman in the glass had eyes that knew too much. Suddenly, a shadow moved in the corner of her room. Emma froze. She didn't sense a wolf. She didn't sense a human. It was something else, a presence that felt like cold ash. "You've done well, Emma Pierce," a voice whispered, the static voice from the void. But now it was clear, melodic, and terrifyingly familiar. Emma turned, her hand flying to the silver pendant. Standing by the window was a figure draped in tattered gray silk. As the figure stepped into the moonlight, Emma felt her heart stop. The face was her own. But the eyes were entirely purple, void of any light, and the skin was as pale as the mountain snow. "Who are you?" Emma gasped. The figure smiled, a cold, empty expression. "I am the part of you that your grandmother tried to drown. I am the hunger you just invited home. And tonight, Emma, tonight, we begin the harvest." The figure vanished into a swirl of mist just as the door to the room was flung open. Evander stood there, his face etched with worry. But Emma couldn't see his face. All she could see was the glowing, golden soul within him. And for the first time in her life, she felt a ravenous, undeniable urge to reach out and swallow it whole. Evander took a step into the room, his presence usually a source of grounding strength, but now it felt like a wave of heat hitting a wall of ice. Emma pressed her back against the door, her fingers digging into the wood. The hunger wasn't just a metaphor. It was a physical ache in her jaw, a hollowness in her stomach that screamed for the golden light radiating from his chest. "Emma, talk to me," Evander said, his voice low and vibrating with a concern that made her chest tighten. "What did you see? I heard you talking." "Don't come closer," Emma gasped, the words catching in her throat. "Evander, please. There was something here. It looked like me." He stopped, his amber eyes narrowing as they scanned the shadows of the room. He didn't see the spectral figure, but he felt the drop in temperature. He could smell the ozone and the scent of dead leaves that always accompanied the shadow. "The Wraith," he whispered, a flash of genuine fear crossing his features. Serena was right. It's manifested. Suddenly, a piercing cry tore through the mansion. Not a howl of a wolf, but a scream of a man in absolute agony. It was followed by the sound of breaking glass and the heavy, rhythmic thud of bodies hitting stone. The harvest had begun. "Lily!" Emma's maternal instinct momentarily bypassed the hunger. She lunged for the door, but Evander caught her arm. The moment his skin touched hers, the purple mark on her wrist flared with a blinding violet light. Emma let out a choked sound, her vision swimming. She didn't see the room anymore. She saw the life force inside Evander, a vast, roiling ocean of gold and fire. It was beautiful. It was delicious. "Take it," the static voice hissed in her ear. "Take it, and you will never feel cold again." "Emma, look at me." Evander's voice was a command, an alpha's call to a packmate. He didn't pull away, even as the violet light began to singe his own skin. He grabbed her other shoulder, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Fight it. You are Emma Pierce. You are a mother. You are not a vessel for this filth." Emma's breath came in ragged sobs. She clawed at his arms, her nails drawing blood, but he didn't flinch. Slowly, the ring of purple in her eyes began to recede, replaced by the familiar, tear-filled blue. The hunger retreated into a corner of her mind, snarling like a caged beast. I'm sorry," she whispered, her forehead resting against his chest. "It's so strong, Evander." "I know," he murmured, his hand moving to the back of her head, holding her close. "I've lived with it for 50 years, but you don't have to do it alone." The screams from the hallway intensified. Evander released her, his face hardening into the alpha's mask. "Stay here. Lock the door. If anyone, human or wolf, tries to enter, use the pendant." "No," Emma said, her voice regaining its steel. "If that thing looks like me, the pack will let it close. They won't know it's the shadow until it's too late. I have to go." They stepped into the corridor, and the scene was a nightmare carved in stone. The hallway was filled with a thick, rolling gray mist. Wolves were slumped against the walls, their bodies convulsing as the gray vapor seeped into their mouths and eyes. It wasn't killing them, it was draining them. In the center of the hall stood the figure Emma had seen in her room, the spectral double. The wraith moved with a terrifying, liquid grace. It touched a warrior's forehead, and the man's golden soul light dimmed, flowing into the wraith's fingers. The double turned to look at them, and its purple eyes hummed with a sick satisfaction. "You're too late, Alpha," the wraith said, its voice an echo of Emma's. "The debt must be paid in full. You broke the seal. Now the pack belongs to the void." Serena and Gabriel appeared at the far end of the hall, leading a group of younger wolves. Serena shifted mid-stride, her gray wolf form a blur of fur and muscle as she lunged at the wraith. "Serena, no!" Emma shouted. Serena's wolf passed right through the wraith, as if it were made of smoke. The spectral figure didn't even flinch. It reached out and caught the wolf's throat, and a jolt of violet energy sent Serena crashing into the wall, whimpering as she shifted back to her human form, clutching a blackened burn on her neck. "It can't be fought with teeth and claws," Gabriel shouted, his voice cracking with age. "Emma, only you can touch it!" Emma looked at the pendant at her throat. It was glowing a fierce, steady emerald. She looked at Evander, who was already preparing to shift, his body tensing with the power of the Alpha. "Evander, wait!" Emma grabbed his hand. "The shadow is feeding on the pack's fear. It's using the bond you have with them to reach into their souls. You have to let the bond go." "What?" Evander looked at her as if she were insane. If I break the bond, the pack falls apart. They'll be mindless animals. Only for a moment, Emma pleaded. The shadow is a parasite. If there's no connection for it to travel through, it will be trapped in the open. I can banish it then. Evander looked at his people, the warriors who had served him for decades, the children who looked to him for protection. To break the bond was the ultimate taboo for an alpha. It was a form of spiritual suicide. Do it, Emma whispered. Trust me. Evander closed his eyes. A low, mournful howl started in his chest, a sound of such profound grief that even the wraith paused. He reached deep into the core of his being, to the place where he was tethered to every soul in Blackcrest, and he cut it. The psychic shockwave was visible. A ripple of gold energy snapped outward, and every wolf in the mansion let out a simultaneous gasp. The connection, the shared mind, the collective strength vanished. The mist in the hallway suddenly went stagnant. The wraith shrieked, its form beginning to flicker and distort. Without the pack bond to feed on, it was losing its anchor to the physical world. "Now, Emma!" Gabriel yelled. Emma lunged forward. She didn't feel like a victim anymore. She felt like a storm. She reached into the silver pendant, pulling out every ounce of light she had, every memory of Lily, every spark of the love her grandmother had for this broken man. She slammed her purple-stained palm into the wraith's chest. A sound, like 1,000 mirrors shattering, filled the hallway. The violet and the emerald light clashed, a blinding explosion that knocked everyone to the ground. Emma felt the shadow resisting, clawing at her mind, trying to drag her into the void with it. "You are mine," the shadow hissed. No, Emma thought, her heart burning with a fierce maternal fire. I am my daughter's mother, and I am the healer of this pack. With a final defiant scream, Emma pushed the energy through the mark. The wraith disintegrated into a cloud of harmless gray ash. The silence that followed was absolute. Emma collapsed onto the cold stone floor, her strength spent. The purple mark on her wrist had faded to a pale, silvery scar. She looked up, her vision blurring, and saw the wolves slowly beginning to stir. They looked dazed, disconnected, but the darkness was gone. Evander was the first to reach her. He was still human, but he looked shattered. The bond was broken, and for the first time in his life, he was truly alone in his own head. He looked at Emma, and the look in his eyes wasn't that of an alpha, but of a man who had lost his way in the woods and finally found a light. He reached out and touched her cheek, his hand trembling. "You saved us," he whispered. "But at what cost?" Emma couldn't answer. She looked toward the end of the hall, where Lily was standing in the doorway of their room, her blue eyes wide with a wisdom no 6-year-old should possess. Lily walked toward them, her footsteps echoing in the silent hall. She knelt beside her mother and the alpha, and she took both of their hands. "The bond isn't gone," Lily said, her voice clear and resonant. "It's just different now." As Lily spoke, a new light began to glow from the silver pendant, a soft, golden-white radiance that didn't just belong to the alpha or the healer. It was something new, something shared. But as the light filled the hall, Emma felt a sudden, sharp pang in her chest. She looked down and saw that the silver-white scar on her wrist was beginning to glow. Not purple, but a deep, resonant red. The appearance of the shadow was gone, but the cycle wasn't finished. The debt of blood had been paid, but the mountains of Blackcrest always demanded more. The red glow on Emma's wrist pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm, but unlike the violet ice of the shadow, this heat felt like a hearth fire. It was the color of a heartbeat, deep and resonant. As the last of the gray ash from the wraith blew away in the drafty corridor, the oppressive weight that had sat on Blackcrest for 50 years finally lifted. The mansion was silent, Not the silence of a tomb, but the breathless quiet of a world that had just been reborn. Evander remained on his knees beside Emma, his hand still clutching hers. He looked diminished, the predatory sharpness of his features softened by a raw, human vulnerability. To an alpha, the pack bond was more than a connection. It was a sensory organ. Now, for the first time since his birth, he was deaf to the thoughts of his people. He was alone in the quiet of his own mind. "It's so quiet," he whispered, his eyes searching the empty air. "I can't hear them anymore. The anger, the loyalty, the hunger, it's all gone." "It's not gone, Evander," Emma said softly, her voice returning to its natural, warm melody. She squeezed his hand, and the red mark on her wrist flared. "You just have to learn to listen with your heart instead of your blood." Gabriel approached them, limping slightly, but with a look of profound peace on his face. He looked at the red mark on Emma's wrist, and then at the silver pendant, which had turned a soft, iridescent white. "The cycle is broken," Gabriel said, his voice thick with emotion. "The lock and the gate are gone. You haven't just suppressed the shadow, Emma. You've replaced the ancient forced pact with something new, a living bond, one that requires choice, not just heritage." Serena stood a few feet away, her human form draped in a borrowed cloak. She looked at Emma, no longer as a human intruder or a ticking bomb, but as the woman who had stood in the path of a wraith and didn't blink. She touched the blackened mark on her neck, which was already beginning to fade under the influence of the new light in the hall. "I spent my life fearing the day the healer would return," Serena said, her voice raspy. "I thought you would make us slaves to your light, but I feel lighter. For the first time, my loyalty to this pack is my own, not a command in my blood." She bowed her head, not the forced submission of a beta to an alpha, but a gesture of genuine, earned respect. As the sun began to crest the jagged peaks of the northern range, the wolves of Blackcrest began to emerge from their rooms. They moved slowly, blinking in the morning light. There was no telepathic roar of command, no synchronized movement. There was only a group of people finding their way back to one another. Kyle, the young wolf Emma had healed in the courtyard, was the first to speak. He walked into the hall, looked at Evander, and then at Emma. Without a word, he knelt and placed a hand on the floor, a silent promise to stay, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. One by one, the others followed. Evander stood up, helping Emma to her feet. He looked out at his people, and though he no longer felt them in his head, he saw them with a clarity he'd never possessed. He saw their flaws, their fears, and their incredible capacity for resilience. "The year and a day remains," Evander said, looking at Emma. The possessiveness was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady devotion. "But you are not a servant, Emma, and this is not a prison. You are the heart of this mountain. If you wish to take Lily and leave, the gates are open. The debt is paid." Emma looked at the red mark on her wrist, then at Lily, who was currently being hoisted onto Kyle's shoulders to see the sunrise. She felt the pulse of the mountain, the ancient trees, and the man standing beside her. She thought of her grandmother, who had fled because she couldn't change the man she loved. Emma realized she didn't have to flee. The man standing before her had sacrificed his absolute power to save her soul. He had chosen to be a man so that she could remain herself. "We'll stay," Emma said, a small, hopeful smile touching her lips. "Lily likes the fresh air, and I think this pack needs someone to remind them that they're more than just wolves." Evander's breath hitched. He reached out, hesitating for a second, before his hand covered hers, over the red mark. There was no explosion of power this time, just a simple, human warmth. "Then we begin again," he whispered. The final image was one of quiet, breathtaking peace. The three of them, Emma, Evander, and Lily, stood on the wide stone balcony overlooking the valley. The mist was gone, replaced by a sky of brilliant, crystalline blue. The forest below wasn't a place of shadows anymore. It was a sea of vibrant green, teeming with life. Emma leaned her head against Evander's shoulder. Lily sat on the railing, swinging her legs and humming a song her grandmother used to sing. The silver wolf pendant hung forgotten against Emma's chest, its work done, its emerald eyes closed as it settled into a simple piece of jewelry. There would be challenges ahead. There would be winters and rivals, and the long process of learning to lead without the old magic. But as the sun warmed the stone beneath their feet, Emma knew that the price she had paid wasn't her freedom. It was the courage to belong. Healing hadn't come from a ritual or a drop of blood. It had come from the moment a monster and a mother decided to trust each other in the dark. Thank you for joining me for this cinematic journey into the heart of Blackcrest. This story reminds us that the greatest power isn't the strength we use to command others, but the vulnerability we show to save those we love. Emma's journey from a desperate mother to the heart of the pack is a testament to the fact that light can bloom even in the deepest shadows. If you felt the pulse of the forest and the heat of the bond, please hit that like button and share this story with a fellow soul seeker. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new legend. Until next time, keep your light bright and your heart open.